Hey, it's Brock here with Rock Hill Farms, and today I want to have a little conversation about whether or not it's still possible in 2024 to live what I consider to be the American dream. Now that term, the American dream, could mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people, but what it means to me is to have the type of blessings I have in my life, which is the opportunity I have to be the steward of a beautiful little piece of God's creation. I have 20 acres here, and I get to spend my time working on this property. And that feels like a blessing that I couldn't have deserved through my own abilities. And I think to myself, every time I go to the grocery store and I see that the price of food has quadrupled in the last 10 years, sometimes I wonder, is it still possible for someone to start with nothing and end up with the life they want? And I don't define that as being wealthy or anything like that. I have no interest in being wealthy. I just want enough to survive and to not stress about money with every minute of every day like a lot of people do in this life. Now, I've got 5 kids between the ages of 16 and 26. The 2 oldest already have their own kids, and I watch, the struggles that they go through, raising kids and getting started, and then I look at my younger kids and I think, how can I give them advice that will set them up in life? And the number one most important thing that I didn't learn, I understood, but I didn't internalize and learn and decided to make part of my life until I was much older. The biggest key is to not owe people money. It changes everything if you can go through this life with less debt. It's biblical wisdom. It says the borrower is slave to the lender. And I understood that, but I didn't fully internalize it as a young man because it doesn't make mathematical sense necessarily. On paper, you can borrow money and use that money to make money and come out ahead, but it puts you in a very risky situation. So the way I want to tell this story is tell the story of a few people I've met recently. I've been selling hay bales and delivering them, and I've been selling these Woodland Mills products that I rebuild. I'm selling firewood, selling tractor attachments. People come to the house, or I deliver to them, and I'll ask them questions, what kind of tractor do you have? We talk, they come around the property, and I'll ask them, what do you do for a living? The biggest thing that struck me, a lot of times it's what these people do for a living and how they made their money and how they got where they are. But recently I've had a lot of young people come here wanting, hay bales and tractor attachments. And to me, that's really exciting, honestly, about the future of our country. Now, I don't watch the news any more than I have to. It's depressing. I try to stay out of the drama that's on social media. There's enough drama talking about tractors without going into anything else. So most of the time I try to stay out of that. But right before the presidential election, I find myself getting sucked into looking at a lot of the political stuff and watching the debates. And it really can be depressing when you hear about all the things that are wrong with our country and the inflation and all these different problems. You've heard it. And it's all real. It's not like it's not real, but focusing on it doesn't help us. And so you go to the grocery store and you see these crazy prices. Then you look at what it costs to own land in 2024. If you bought your land 30 years ago, it might have felt like a lot at the time, but looking back now, you stole that land by today's standard. And I think, if I was that age, how would I do it? And man, do I feel like I know now. So whenever I was 18, I started my family. I got married at 19. In my early 20s, I had a whole house full of kids. And as soon as you do that, you are obligated to a lot more than you may be prepared to manage. Now, it's a personal decision at what age you have kids, but if you could just set a basic foundation for yourself to have some stability before doing that, it's like building your house on a solid foundation. If you go too far too fast without building a foundation, it gets to the point where if you've got a lot of debt and a menial paying job, it's basically impossible to get ahead. But there are still steps you can take. But when I'm talking to a young person, like my teenagers now, or these young guys that have been here recently, I think the number one thing you could do is save money when you're really young by doing practical things and try to get into your first piece of property. So there was a kid here yesterday who's 18 years old and owns his tractor. He's renting a house right now, and he pays all his bills, does everything he needs to do by running that tractor. And I do some paid tractor work. I would kind of like to get into doing more and more paid tractor work and making that like several times per week doing these jobs, but I have to balance it with the fact that I do get paid decently well to make videos, and so both are a priority to me, and finding alternative ways to make money. I'm rebuilding sawmills, I'm doing the firewood, I'm doing hay, I'm doing stuff like that. But I looked at this kid and I was so inspired that I almost talked him into getting on camera and making a video with me. So I didn't get every detail of his story, but it sounds like someone in his family had an old like Ford 8N tractor and a truck and trailer combo that he could use when he was 15 and 16 to start doing brush cutting for people and fixing driveways. And every time they paid him, he didn't have any expenses. He saved that money. Then he bought his own new tractor. He bought an LS like MT240, I think is the model number. That's a tractor I've looked at and reviewed before. LS is kind of on the more affordable side, but it's a good machine. You know, if he bought the base machine without a bunch of add-ons, he might have been able to get into that for $20,000 by saving up 3 years of money from doing these paid jobs. You know, I didn't get every detail from him, but I got enough of his story to be proud of this young man I hadn't met. So now he does pretty much every day. He says he's booked out with 1 or 2 jobs, and he goes out and does this work for people and uses the money to buy more equipment and pay his bills. And I think that's a fantastic way to build a foundation in life. And I was telling him, you know, the sky's the limit on things you want to do. He could, in 5 years, have a dump trailer and a mini excavator and a skid steer, and by the time he's my age, he could be running a 20-employee, full-size excavation business by learning as he goes and working through all these steps. Or maybe that's not what he wants, but the number of options available to him are unlimited, and by acquiring that equipment and that skill set without debt, you can become a high-income earner without like an advanced college degree or anything like that. And you could build a foundation where it would not be that far-fetched to own a piece of land like this without debt. I am living my dream, but I'm carrying all this debt. And you've seen me do things that were painful to me to try to reduce my debt load and live a life without the anxiety of debt. So I had a dump trailer that I absolutely loved, and I sold it to pay off debt. And I had a skid steer that I still owed $70,000 on. And I loved that machine, and it was great for my YouTube channel. It helped me earn money. I loved that machine. But carrying another $70,000 of debt when I have an expensive truck and an expensive property and all these things, just, it wasn't the right move. The right move is to get back to owning an affordable used skid steer. For me, that's the right move, by paying off my debt and paying cash for that machine. So that's where I'm trying to get to. And I look at it, if I was 18 today and starting out and building that, the pathway is there to say, just by hard work, I can still do it the old-fashioned way. And by the time you are my age, I'm 43, by this age, you could really be set up well. And there's a couple guys who have large-scale excavation businesses close to me that are my age. One of them's a little older than me. I think the other one's probably in his 60s, but very successful. Don't have any money problems, we'll say that. And they started by just doing little tractor work jobs. Now, that's not the path for everyone. There's a lot of other paths, and my son is taking a very different path, and I have some advice for him. He's going the college degree route. He's going to take a whole different path, but everything I'm talking about is still within reach for him as well. But I want to talk about another young man that I just met who is selling firewood, and he started off cutting it with, all he had was one old beat-up chainsaw and a splitting maul. And he's cutting it the hard way and selling it, saving the money. He bought himself a homeowner-grade log splitter. And I brought him up here and I showed him these splitters I had and the equipment I used to move the logs and different things. And we talked for about an hour about, how he could progress if he wanted to with the firewood business into something that was more profitable. Or if it made more sense, you've really got to run the numbers on what kind of log splitter and what kind of equipment makes sense. But you could save enough money just using your homeowner log splitter to buy a much nicer, faster splitter and a tractor to help you move your logs around and things like that. And you could build a little firewood empire. There are guys who have made that their thing. But there's also the possibility to do that on the side, work a regular job, and use what money you make on firewood to buy your first home. Now, all of this is just one path, and there's nothing easy about it. I don't want to make it sound like this is easy. But when I was a young man, I spent every dollar I got on stuff I didn't need. And that set me back dramatically. And I'm thinking now that a little bit of discipline from the ages of 18 to 25 could make the entire rest of your life completely transformed. So my son that has just graduated from high school, he was always a straight A student, did very well on his placement exams, followed the rules. He's a lot different than me personality-wise. He's more detail-oriented, and he's going to take a different path. But I've been telling him, and without me talking to him, he got really into watching videos on personal finance on YouTube. And he's watched hours and hours. Like every day, I go by his room, and he's listening to Dave Ramsey and stuff like that without me telling him to. And he's got this budgeting app, and he is paid for his college just by umpiring baseball games in the summer. He saved every bit of his money, already paid his tuition for his first year of college. Now he's got a regular job, and he's going to umpire on the side, and he's taking 19 hours of college classes, and he's going to live with us, and as long as he's doing everything else, he doesn't have to have expenses for food or rent or utilities or anything like that. If he's paying for his schooling and saving money, I'll make his life as easy as I can, which to me is a lot better than if he was spending all his money on video games and going out and buying junk and hanging out with his friends and just blowing through his money. He doesn't spend anything. If he was doing that and wanted me to pay for his schooling, I'd be a lot less enthusiastic about that. But I've been talking to him. He's talking about how he could just save his money and different things, and there's a lot of paths out there. And one that a very practical thing that a young person could do to set them up for success for their whole lives is inexpensive real estate. In rural areas like where I live, 7 years ago, I bought a house for $14,000 that had a family living in it. And this house needed a ton of work. It was structurally, it had issues. I've shown this house a lot in the videos. The series, I refinished it in my very first videos. I went through the house, redid everything. Then in a later video, I showed where I sold it. But if you bought a house like that for $14,000, by saving money from firewood or your part-time job or whatever it is that you're able to do, if you bought a house like that for cash, moved into it, and renovated it while you lived in it, you could own something that's worth $50,000, $75,000, $100,000 as a young person and not have any debt on it. At which point you could rent that house out and use that rent money to pay for your next house. And you could snowball that. I've went deep down that rabbit hole. I had 2 rental houses. Now I only have 1. But I went pretty deep down that rabbit hole of how all the numbers work and how there are multiple streams of income. It's not just the rental income that you get off of a rental house. You also have appreciation and tax savings and mortgage pay down. There are a lot of self-made millionaires who did it by buying cheap houses. And that's a path. And I think the reason people feel it's so hopeless is they're trying to live a certain standard that doesn't make sense. So I'm going to have a nice new car, my wife's going to have a nice new car, and we're going to live in a fancy house. And, you know, the cell phone plans and the streaming services and all of this stuff. And between our 2 full-time jobs, we make $3,000 a month. Maybe that's not realistic. What is the income today for 2 jobs? Let's say you're doing pretty well and you're making $5,000 a month as a young couple, and it costs you $6,000 to live, and you're putting stuff on credit cards, and like a lot of people are living that way, and I lived that way most of my life. And so I wouldn't change anything in my life because I love where I'm at today. But if I was starting over and didn't have any options in it, I was starting over at 18, I would be debt-free and own a home by 25. I guarantee that with everything I have. And anybody out there that's young can do it. And if I know a lot of my audience is older than me, my age or older. If you ever get a chance to get the ear of a young man or young woman and just explain to them that you don't have to live your whole life worried and scared about money, that if you will delay gratification while you're young and build equity, the life that you want is available to you. And I feel like a lot of these young people who complain about society today don't have a grasp for my idea of what an American dream is. And that it doesn't have anything to do with, fancy corporate jobs or sitting in an office or living in a $500,000 house and trying to have a more perfect lawn than your neighbor. If that's what you love, great. But there's a life out there that has less stress, that is still attainable in 2024, no matter what you see on TV or what the political advertisements tell you. And I guess the last thing about that, if you watch political commentary, you'd think the world is a terrible place. Because there are bad things that happen in this world. There truly are, and there's no denying that. But if you go around and you just talk to people, I know in a rural area like this, most people are kind and generous and good, and they just want the best for themselves and their family and the people around them. And I think it's important that we don't lose sight of that. And I also kind of wanted to have this talk so that you guys could understand where I'm coming from when you see the decisions I make. Like, people wanted me to keep the skid steer. People want me to keep the John Deere tractor. And some people, especially people new to the channel, blame me for taking equipment in exchange for video content. I'm just going to tell you what I'm trying to accomplish is a basic level of stability as I get closer to retirement, where I'm not burdened by debt and I can live on this property. And that's, to me, the American dream. So, nothing groundbreaking in this video. Just wanted to sit down and have a talk with you guys. I appreciate you taking time to watch. I'll put links on the screen to a couple more of our videos, and I'll see you next time.